The recession actually was good for their business. It was an opportunity to figure out what was not working and what was not profitable. And on the flip side, you could very clearly see what your money makers are. Welcome to Profit and Prosper, a podcast for entrepreneurs who are ready to make some money while doing what they love. On this podcast, we're going to pull back the curtain and talk about all things business and money. But I promise you, this is not your typical boring numbers talk. I'm your host, Sarah Young, a CPA and CFO with over a decade of experience in finance, business, and leadership. I'm going to share everything I've learned from helping my clients grow more profitable businesses and keep more of what they earn while growing my own successful business along the way. You'll feel empowered and confident that you too can grow your wealth, live a rich life, and have an impact. Stick with me and you might even start to think that finance is fun. Let's dive in. Welcome back, y'all, to another episode of the Profit and Prosper podcast. Today, I want to talk about something that I think has been on a lot of people's minds, and that is, are we in a recession, and what is going to happen to my business? So I think the answer to the question of whether or not we're in a recession kind of depends on who you ask, and it is sort of a political question because, of course, the party in power doesn't want to say that we're in a recession, and then the party that's not in power wants to say we are to make each other look bad or make themselves look good. So I'm going to avoid the political talk, but I will say, there are some signs that point to us being in a recession, but it has not been officially announced by the government. We are in a recession. All the politics and all this other stuff aside, what are the things that you can do as a business owner to weather the storm? We will talk about why a recession might actually be an opportunity for you. So flipping the script from one of fear and anxiety, but to thinking about how you can capitalize on an economic downturn. And I'll actually give you some thoughts from clients who were in business during the last recession, which was the Great Recession. I will talk about at the same time why this is not the Great Recession, and we will talk about 4 tips to weather any recession or really any slow cash month. All right, so first question, are we even in a recession? Like I said, it seems to depend on who you ask, but either we're in a recession already or we are going to be in one soon. And the reason that it's sort of a tricky thing is that, one of the unofficial metrics of whether or not we're in a recession is the GDP. So the GDP is the gross domestic product, and this is basically a measure of the output of the economy. So the GDP fell 1.6% in Q1 of 2022, and then fell again 0.9% in Q2 of 2022. So a lot of people say that when the GDP falls for 2 consecutive quarters, we are in a recession. But at the same time, we have other things going on, like we have a low unemployment rate, wages are rising, things like that sort of indicate maybe we're not in a full-on recession, at least not just yet. But here's what I want to make sure we address. All of the economic stuff aside, I think that the idea of us going into a recession can induce fear or anxiety or panic, right? About, oh my God, what is going to happen to my business? Am I going to make it? Recessions are a totally normal part of the economic cycle. Honestly, this is true for any cycle that we go through, whether it's, seasons or your body's cycle or just any cycle. You can't constantly grow month after month, quarter after quarter, day after day, without expecting to have some times where things slow down. And I think this idea that things are always going to be growing without end is definitely something that comes out of just capitalism, right? And the Industrial Revolution, where we seem to think that we're all machines and we can just keep going nonstop without a break. But we're not machines. As I think we talked about this several episodes ago with the interview with Jessica Lackey, where we just talked about some of the cycles in business and recognizing that it is totally normal for us individually and also for us as a group, right? The economy is just everybody as a group, all of our buying habits on the big picture whole. It's just normal for us to have times where we slow down or even kind of pull back a little bit. It has been a while since we have been in a recession, in part because after the Great Recession, the government did things like keep interest rates really, really low for a really long time to continue to spur economic activity. So it's been a while, and I think that because it's been a while, and if you're my age, so I'm 35, I graduated college in 2009, and I graduated into the Great Recession. And so I know a lot of you are millennials listening to this podcast, and you probably had that experience where you were starting your career or you were early in your career during the Great Recession, or maybe you started your career shortly thereafter. But either way, I think a lot of us really felt the impacts of that. But I want to be clear that the Great Recession is not all recessions, right? So in the Great Recession, just for reference, I pulled a few things just to sort of hopefully prove my point. For one thing, the GDP in the Great Recession fell not 1.6% or 0.9%, but it fell 4.3% from the highest point to the lowest point over about a 1.5-year time period. That's a pretty steep decrease. And it sounds like it's not a lot, but when the economy produces trillions of dollars, 4.3% of that is a lot of money. Unemployment during the Great Recession peaked at 10%. Compare that to now. Unemployment as of this month, the latest report was July 2022, unemployment is at 3.5%. And so, yes, we could probably go on and make arguments for people who left the workforce during COVID, making that artificially low, but I'm not going to go into all of that for purposes of today's episode. I just want to make the point that this is happening to me where I graduated during the Great Recession, and that is my only real experience that I can remember with a recession, and that was a really bad one. And so remembering that not all recessions will be like the Great Recession, and honestly, you may barely even notice a blip in your business, to be quite honest, right? So I think if we can sort of flip the script and instead of viewing a recession as something causing fear, and think of it more as, one, how can we make sure we take care of ourselves? And then two, how can we view a recession as an opportunity to actually grow your business and solidify your business? So that's what I want to talk about in the rest of this episode. How do you know you're ready to hire a CFO? How do you know you'll get a return on a big investment like that? I know that you need a CFO when your business gets to be too big and has too many moving parts for you to be able to handle all of your finances. When you don't have a solid financial strategy in place, and you would love to start investing and building your wealth, becoming more of a business owner instead of working a job in your business, but you just don't know where to start and aren't getting enough support from your bookkeeper or tax accountant. I'm on a mission to help more business owners become millionaires and to have more financial power. And we do that by increasing your cash flow and the value of your business, investing in the right things to grow and systematize everything, including paying you a regular CEO salary, of course, and then putting your profits into other assets that will in turn give you even more cash flow and passive income and potentially save you some tax money. Our CFO service is a very hands-on service for quickly growing 6- and 7-figure businesses where you get an integrated finance team, including me as your CFO in your back pocket, all focused on making you more profitable. We'll handle your financial strategy, accounting, and taxes so you can turn your business into a wealth-generating engine. If you are ready to add a CFO to your team, you can read more about what we do at trustyoungco.com/CFO. and scroll all the way down to the bottom of the page where you can book a free call with me. So here's the question. How can you view a recession as an opportunity? So I was obviously not running my business during the Great Recession. Was in the graduating college and starting my first job, which interestingly, my first job was teaching. I joined Teach for America for 2 years because I graduated with a business degree, but many of the employers who came to campus to recruit didn't even come. They didn't have jobs they were recruiting for, and the ones that did were kind of mediocre, to be honest. And so I decided to think outside the box. And so I guess all of that is to say, I turned that into an opportunity for myself because in doing what I did, I learned teaching skills, speaking skills. I learned how to break complex topics down. I could teach algebra to, a bunch of ninth graders who didn't want to be there, right? To 32 of them. That was my biggest class. And y'all, if I can do that, I can do anything. So obviously I was not in business during the Great Recession, but I have clients who were. And I have asked them, how was the Great Recession for you? Like, how did your business fare? What was your experience? And honestly, I think you have to remember that if I'm talking to my clients now, that they obviously weathered the Great Recession. But I want to hear from the people who made it through as far as like, what were the things that worked for you? And so there are a bunch of businesses that didn't make it through the Great Recession. But the clients who are still around, they said that the recession actually was good for their business in a handful of ways. One of those ways was it was an opportunity to figure out what was not working and what was not profitable. And on the flip side, you could very clearly see what your money makers are. So I know a lot of us tend to have a ton of different things that we offer. We might have like a huge product suite, but when you really boil it down, there are just a handful of activities that work really well for you, and everything else is a waste of time. And so when these clients were going through the Great Recession, one of the things that they did was cut out the stuff that didn't work and focus on the stuff that did work, focus on the money makers. And so they really didn't have a choice to do that because, if they focused on the stuff that wasn't making them money, they would have gone out of business. And so I think it's an opportunity to really capitalize on your money makers. And I think a successful business is one that you have figured out what it is that makes you money, and you just do that over and over and over again, right? And that sounds boring. And it's true that it can be boring because you're doing really the same thing over and over again. But honestly, that is where the success lies, is figuring out the best way to get the biggest ROI, the biggest return on investment on your time and money. So they cut out the fat. They also found that a lot of costs decreased, right? And so I think that is particularly relevant today, given that inflation rates have been crazy high. And in fact, it is looking like the inflation being so high is what is causing the recession. Inflation is high because starting with COVID, the government started pumping out, I think billions, I don't remember how many billions of dollars, hundreds of billions of dollars into the economy for stimulus checks, for PPP loans and the EIDL, right? All of these programs were designed to stimulate the economy, but when you have more money, this is from Economics 101, when you have more money circulating out in the economy, inflation rises. And then when things get to be really expensive, like when gas is crazy expensive, everyday households and even businesses are having to spend more on gas and labor, right? And that cuts out their ability to spend on other things or to save money or to invest money. So in this case, the recession was an opportunity for these business owners because costs started to cool off some. So for example, I had one client who said that labor got to be easier to find and cheaper. And yes, we can make an argument that we don't want to pay people really low rates. I totally hear that. And I'm not advocating for underpaying people at all. But I do know from working with clients that lately, in the last couple of years, it has gotten to be really difficult to hire people, in part because inflation means people want to be paid more because everything costs more. And then that also trickles down into the business. Fuel costs decreased, which is, I know, is super relevant today. And also things like real estate or assets to invest in, the stock market, right? All of these things cost less. So thinking about real estate, I live in Charlotte, North Carolina, where housing prices over the last couple of years have just gone absolutely through the roof. And I know that this is happening all across the US. And some of that may be due to we have these huge companies going in and buying really cheap houses and turning them into rentals, which again, that's probably another conversation to be had. But real estate prices are going super high for a variety of reasons. And when we go into a recession, the prices will cool off. So if you are someone who has been interested in buying into real estate, I know a lot of clients who are saving up money, just waiting for the opportunity to present itself for prices to be lower. And actually, my husband, he calls this a war chest in typical man fashion. If you're listening, honey, I love you. But like, war chest is kind of a man's term. I haven't come up with a better thing to call this, but it's kind of true, right? Like, we have cash sitting here that people are hesitant to invest right now because real estate prices are high or the stock market is really volatile. But you go into a recession where things get cheaper with a pile of cash or a war chest, right? And that is an opportunity to invest and build your wealth. The last thing that I think helps turn a recession into an opportunity is it's an opportunity to pick up market share because you have other business owners out there who, bless them, but they're not taking care of their money. And they're going to have to shut down, right? We saw during COVID tons and tons of businesses who had to shut down, and some of them shut down really early during the pandemic because they didn't do the things I'm going to talk about to weather a recession. They weren't able to pivot their business, right? But if you are still there and your competitors go out of business, that is an opportunity to pick up market share, right? And I'm not trying to sound like I'm advocating for anybody to go out of business, but it's just a fact. Tons of businesses go out of business every year, and it will only increase during a recession unless you take steps to weather the slowdown. So let's talk about 4 tips to weather a recession, or really, y'all, these are not just good tips for a recession. These are really the same sorts of things that I talk about all the time, and they just become more crucial during a recession. So the first thing that you need to do to weather a recession is have a cash cushion. Does this sound familiar? I tell people to set up a cash cushion all of the time. But the main reason you need to have reserves built up is so that if your sales do slow down, you're not screwed. You want to have a cushion of at least 2 to 3 months of expenses saved up to cover your business expenses, right? At the same time, you also want to have a personal emergency fund saved up, so that if for some reason you're not able to pay yourself from your business for a month or 2 months or longer, you still have money to keep living your life, right? And you don't have to go out and get another job. It's also helpful to have a cushion in your business. So like we talked about a second ago, when businesses, had COVID shutdowns happen and their sales declined, a lot of them went out of business really fast, probably because they did not have a cushion. Right? They didn't have enough reserves to be able to keep things afloat until the sales picked back up. And they also didn't have the runway to pivot. So some restaurants went out of business and other restaurants got really savvy about carry-out orders and delivery and all of these things to keep the sales coming in because people still need to eat, y'all, right? And those were the ones who likely had the money and the brain space, frankly, to be able to pivot their business and keep making money. Now, there's always a balance between having enough cash for reserves and having too much cash. So we are also in this time of very high inflation. So I forget the exact number, but the last monthly numbers that came out were right around 9%. So what that means is it cost 9% more from this time a year ago to buy a basket of goods, the things that you need to just spend on in your normal life, right? Food, gas, housing, all of that stuff. It costs 9% more. Normally, inflation is more like 2%, maybe 3% in most normal times. When inflation is high, having a ton of cash in your bank account means your cash is losing buying power. So if I had, for example, $100 in my bank account a year ago in cash, then you're going to be lucky to get a 1% savings rate on you're definitely not going to get that 1% interest rate on a plain old checking account, right? So if I had $100 in a checking account a year ago, then today, basically that $100 could only buy me about $90 worth of stuff. So I've lost that buying power because of inflation. And so you're probably thinking like, well, Sarah, you just said you need to keep cash on hand. And you do, but only up to a certain extent, right? So we want to have enough cash to weather the storm. You also don't want to have, like, let's say if you have a retirement account or a brokerage account. If you didn't have cash on hand and you suddenly need cash, you need to dip into your reserves, but you don't have cash, you only have stuff invested in the stock market, then you are going to be forced to sell the stuff that is in your retirement or brokerage account, the assets in there, at whatever the price is. You don't have a choice because you need the money. And so what's also happening right now is stocks are crazy volatile, right? And they've dropped so much this year that if you have to sell right now, you're selling at a loss. So you're going to lock that in, right? And you probably don't want to do that. You probably also shouldn't be pulling stuff out of your investment accounts if you can help it, because it will increase back up over time, right? And so if you pull it out now, you are missing out on the growth that is going to happen at some point in the future. And I'm not saying it's going to happen in the next week, but over the long term, the stock market is going to keep growing. It has always grown at something like an average of 10% per year. So we want to have enough cash on hand just to cover our basic necessities. Generally speaking, I would say 2 months in your business, maybe 3 if you have a long sales cycle or heavy inventory, heavy equipment, something like that where you may need a little bit more cash on hand, but not necessarily more than that, because if you keep more than that in your account, you are missing out on investment opportunities and your cash is losing value. And then I would say 6 months for your personal expenses. Some people say up to a year. I probably wouldn't have more than 12 months though on hand in cash, unless you have, something specific. You're building up a quote unquote war chest to go buy something in the very near future, right? That's tip 1, is just build up your cash reserve. So if you don't already have reserves, what I would say to do is, as you go through the next few months, whenever you have extra cash, sock it away, build up those reserves, because if you don't have to use it as a reserve during a slowdown, you can use it as a war chest. I need to come up with a better phrase for this. Tip number 2 is diversify. Diversify anything you can. But when it comes to your business, right, you don't want to have all of your eggs in one basket. So I'll use an example where they were getting all of their leads from one source. And then something happened. They got a bad review. Their account got shut down or something like that from that one source. And just like that, I snapped my fingers for those of you listening. Just like that, all of their leads dried up and their sales went away. And so we want to diversify everything from your lead generation, right? So if you're only getting business from Google, try to think of other ways, maybe do some podcast interviews, maybe get some referrals, do some networking, do something like that to get leads from other sources so that if one source dries up, you're not stuck. It could also mean looking at your client base, your customer base. So, who are your customers and how much are they going to be impacted by a recession? So, if you're working with, not to pick on newer business owners, but if you're working with a newer business owner who maybe doesn't have all of these things built up yet to weather a recession, they're probably going to be more sensitive to it as compared to somebody making millions of dollars with really solid systems and really solid presence, right? They're probably not going to be as, sensitive to a slowdown. Hopefully, I mean, I've certainly seen everything, but hopefully they're not as sensitive. Or you could have a B2C business, and if you're working with, I was talking to somebody and she's like, well, I have two customer bases. One is sort of older retirees who just are living their life, living their best life, like money's not a problem for them, versus, newer, younger business owners who want to like break into this space. And so the retirees are out here just having fun, and like the new business owners are really needing it to make money. The newer business owners are going to be sensitive to a recession. The older retirees with money, probably not. Well, assuming they have money, right? So look at who your customers are and ask yourself if you need to diversify your customer base, right? So not just your lead generation, but who you're working with. And I would also say, look at your price points. So if all you have are high ticket, expensive offers, it might be a great time to bring out some lower priced offers. Maybe people want, instead of a recurring monthly contract, maybe they want a VIP day. Maybe they want a lower cost program, right? Diversifying price points too. Just don't put all your eggs in one basket, because if that basket goes away, your business is going to majorly slow down and you'll definitely need those cash reserves. Tip number 3 is to look at your contracts. And honestly, this is always a good idea, but I'm especially curious for you to look at your contracts to see what do you actually say your cancellation policies are? What are your payment terms? Do clients pay you upfront or way after the fact? What is your refund policy? What is your late payment policy? And I think there's a lot of people who I see, and I'll be honest, I've done this too, where you may have those contract terms in place that protect you, but you never enforce them. And so it would be a good time to not just make sure that your contract terms are, all good, like you're covered in terms of like getting payment up front before you deliver the work, right? Or having milestone payments where, maybe you don't release the deliverables to your client until after they pay. Making sure your refund policies are sound so that, if somebody does request a refund, here's the process you go through so people can't just get slap happy with refunds, right? But then also ask yourself, how can I enforce these contract terms better? Because if you do have a customer base that is sensitive to a slowdown, you might see a pickup in cancellations, slower payments, refunds, right? And we want to make sure we already have a process for these. So that one's tip number 3. Tip number 4, the last one, is having a plan. And you don't have to break out the spreadsheets and do some insane forecast unless you want to, which like I'm on board, I do that too, but you don't have to. I really want to know, thinking about going through a potential recession, what is the best case and also what is the worst case? So I think most of the time when we do plans, we always assume like best case scenario. But I also want to think through, what is the worst case? What would happen if your revenue dropped by 10%? Or what would happen if it dropped by 50%, right? What would you do? Would you have, team members you would have to let go? Would you have maybe other things you can pull out of your back pocket for a quick cash infusion, right? What are those things? And just know what plan A is and also plan B, plan C, and plan D. Because I don't know if your brain works like mine, but my brain works better when I have plans for all the different scenarios. And I would also encourage you to think about, what you really truly need from a financial perspective to be taken care of on the personal side. So sometimes I ask people, like, what is your monthly budget? How much do you need to afford just living your life, right? Paying the mortgage or rent, the car stuff, gas, childcare, right? How much is that? You need to know that number so that you always have a plan for, well, how am I going to keep paying myself that? Maybe you have 6 months saved up in your reserves, but I think it's still helpful to know, well, hey, if I need to generate $5,000 a month and this product over here doesn't do well, maybe I'll pull this one out of my back pocket and I'll, find a quick way to come up with my $5,000 and I'm taken care of. So just have a plan. I think your brain will appreciate knowing like all of the different scenarios that could potentially happen. And I think it'll help you feel less anxious. I know when I feel more stressed out about my personal finances, that always carries over, energetically speaking, into my business, into my client calls, and my sales calls, into my marketing and content and all of that. Knowing that I'm safe on the personal financial side helps me show up better and run my business better. So have a plan, all right? So here were your 4 tips. Build up your cash reserves was tip number 1. Number 2, diversify. Number 3, clean up your contracts and your payment terms. And number 4, come up with a plan. Whether we're in a recession or not in a recession or whatever, all of those things I think are super important for you to have implemented in your business at any time just to create a resilient business, right? Figure out, I want you to listen to this episode and think through each of those tips and ask yourself, what do I need to do to execute those in the next month or 2, right? I think some of us might already be feeling the impact of our clients or customers potentially having some more anxiety around their cash flow. And so I think going ahead and putting some of these things in place will set you up for success in the long run. And here's how I'll close it out. I truly believe that you need to have your finances in order to do all of the things I've talked about in this episode, but just to have a healthy business is step 1, a stable business, but then to grow your business and build your wealth. So if you feel like you need help with that, if you are an established business owner who is ready to add to their finance team to start managing their money better, to start streamlining your financial systems, and ultimately to start investing and growing your business and building your wealth, that is what I do with my CFO clients. So I want you to, if you're listening to this and you're feeling like, I really need a financial partner, then go to my website, or we'll put a link in the show notes. Go there, book a call with me, and we'll see how we as a CFO team can help your business. Many of you, most of you, cannot afford to not take care of your finances. So I think that, if you're in that place, let's chat. All right, y'all. I hope this episode was helpful and you have some actionable tips, and I will see you back next week. Thanks for listening to this week's episode. Now, I want you to go take some action. What's one thing you can do this week to create more profit in your business? Send me a DM on Instagram at YoungCoCFO and share your action item with me. If you have a question or topic you'd like me to dive into, or if you're feeling empowered about taking charge of your finances, let's continue the conversation. Go to profitandprosper.co to submit a question or topic for me to talk about on the show. And because we all profit and prosper better with friends, please leave me a review on Apple Podcasts, subscribe wherever you listen, and share the episode. Make sure you tag me at YoungCoCFO on Instagram so I can give you some love, and I'll see you in the next episode.